Revan woke up stripped of her armor and tied to a table. It wasn't the first time, and years of training stopped her from making any noticeable movements. The brief spike in her breathing was quickly lowered to what was normal for someone asleep. When nothing happened, Revan opened herself up to the Force and cast out her senses. She was on a ship. She could sense around 30 other sentients around her, but other than them, there was just the void of space. Most of the signatures were above her, several more below, and only a couple more at her level. At the risk of alerting someone she was awake, Revan cracked an eye and quickly glanced at her surroundings. The first thing was her bindings. Thick leather loops secured her wrists and ankles. There were no locks visible, so escaping probably wouldn't be that difficult. Did they not know who she was? Perhaps they simply thought she wouldn't be any shape to escape, considering it looked like she was in some kind of medical bay. One different than any ship she had seen before, considering the lack of any Bacta tanks. Or maybe this was a secondary medical bay and they were only going to lightly treat her wounds. Revan noticed her ribs had been seen to and that there were bandages on several cuts and wounds. None of her injuries would affect her combat ability, however. Just so long as she didn't take any hard hits to her ribcage. The room was occupied, however. A human woman, hair grey from age, was sitting at a desk near one of the two doors. She was facing away from Revan and didn't seem to notice that Revan had woken up. Revan closed her eyes and ran over her options. She could continue to pretend to be unconscious. Collect as much information as she could before attempting to escape. She could also tear her way free and kill everyone on the ship. She was sure the Jedi she ran into earlier wouldn't be too hard to handle now that she was more rested. Revan thought about it and dismissed both ideas. She had no idea where this ship was taking her. The worst-case scenario was they were taking her to the Republic, but without more information she would be completely lost. She also wasn't about to start a bloodbath on an unknown style of ship. She had come across several models where a minimum number of crew were required for it to function, and a slow death in space because she had killed everyone was not appealing. More information was needed. And fortunately for her, there was an unsuspecting source right in front of her. Revan reached out to the Force and quickly undid the leather bindings. She rose from the table she was on and stalked towards the human with a predatory grace. She made absolutely no sound, so the first hint the human had that her patient was awake was when Revan's hands wrapped around her throat and mouth, stifling a surprised yelp. Moving with quick, precise steps, Revan dragged her captive away from the desk and the polarized window looking into the rest of the ship. She pressed the elderly human firmly into a wall away from anything she could use as a weapon and looked into her eyes. The human's eyes were wide and she was clearly afraid, but she was also not blindly terrified of the Sith Lord who had her by the throat. "I'm going to move my hand," Revan said in basic. "If you scream or try to raise an alarm, I will kill you. If you answer my questions, I will let you live. Do you understand?" The human furrowed her brow uncomprehendingly, and Revan could feel her confusion in the Force. Did this woman not speak basic? Odd. Nearly every human population center learned it during primary education. Revan repeated herself several times with a number of trade languages she had picked up, trying to find a way to communicate. To her increasing frustration, the human didn't seem to recognize a single one, although Revan could feel her fear receding the more Revan tried. In fact, it was slowly being replaced with curiosity. Well, at least one of them found this interesting. Revan sighed as she realized she was wasting too much time. Force knew how long it would be until someone would notice that their captive was awake and not quite a captive anymore. She removed her hand from the woman's mouth, squeezing her neck gently when the woman opened it to talk, and pressed their foreheads together. The woman's fear picked up again at the unknown action, but Revan ignored it and drew on the Force again before reaching out and diving into the woman's mind. Telepathy was not something Revan was particularly skilled at, but learning languages was actually very easy with practice. As long as the target didn't have special mental defenses, there was no way for any species, at least none Revan had encountered, to guard against it. Several minutes later, Revan had absorbed enough of the language to at least speak fluently. Now let's try this again. The woman's eyes went wide at Revan's sudden use of her language. Her fear spiked and Revan had to lightly choke her again to stop her from speaking out. Do not try to raise the alarm. I won't hurt you, but you will need to answer a few questions. Understand? The human nodded. What is your name? Dr. Karen Chakwas, I'm TH. Revan cut her off by squeezing her neck again. Just answer the question. I don't need extra information. Where are we? On the SR2 Normandy. Revan waited, but the woman had decided to comply with the letter of her request rather than the spirit. She was impressed. Most sentients couldn't help but babble when being threatened. And where in space are we? The Fatah system, in the Omega Nebula. Revan had never heard of that system. Is that in Republic space? It isn't. That made Revan relax a bit. If she wasn't already in Republic space, that meant she had a little more time to decide how to escape. She would likely have an easier time rejoining her forces too. Do your escape pods have a hyperdrive installed? A what? Revan froze. Surely she hadn't landed in one of those super primitive sectors of space. What little she could see of the ship made it seem like they were at least somewhat technologically advanced. If they cracked artificial gravity, then obviously they managed FTR, right? A hyperdrive, an FTR drive? Revan said slowly. You do have those, right? Chakwas nodded. Well, at least Revan wasn't completely screwed. Oh good. How far away are we from Republic space then? We are in the Terminus systems. Trying to reach the Asari Republic with only a lifeboat would take you years. Even with a mass relay. Chakwas said in disbelief. Asari Republic? Mass relay? Revan was starting to think she might be a bit farther from home than she initially thought. She opened her mouth to ask another question, but one of the medbay doors burst open and 3 figures with guns pointed in her direction rushed in. Revan quickly put the doctor between her and the newcomers. Freeze, elf. Let her go. Oh. A couple hours after the ground team returned to the Normandy, Shepard called Miranda into the conference room to discuss what happened on their latest mission. Perhaps unsurprisingly, she was not thrilled to have needed to respond to a crashed ship so soon after the events of the first Normandy, soon to her at any rate, and getting beaten up by the person they were trying to rescue hadn't improved her mood. Very tellingly, not even Joker had joked about the double black eye she was sporting. Do we have any idea where our elven space princess came from? Or why she was alone on a ship all the way out here? At least Shepard hoped that she was alone. They had searched all the rooms they could and had Edie scanned the surrounding area for life signs but had found nothing. Either their new guest had been alone from the start, or they had been spaced when the engines had torn themselves free. Sorry Shepard, I checked every language database Cerberus has access to, but I can't find any matches for the text we found. Miranda reluctantly admitted. Shepard had only known the woman for a short time, but she could tell failure wasn't something Miranda really accepted. But without more information or a whole lot of time, they wouldn't be able to translate anything. Well, that sucks, but if this really was first contact, it's kinda expected. Thanks for checking anyway, Miranda. Edie, do we have any clues on what she called me? Jedi or something like that? The holo emitter on the conference table activated to display Edie's avatar, a simple blue pawn-like figure. Yes, Commander. I have found several references to Jedi in historical databases. I have forwarded a summary to your Omnitool. Edie actually found something? That was great. Maybe it would give them an idea of where the elf had come from. She couldn't divert from her mission to investigate the collectors, but she could bend her flight path a bit if it was close enough, or call in a favor from Admiral Hackett if she needed to. Shepard and Miranda both dove into the files Edie collected, eager to learn about their new guest. After the first 5 minutes, they both looked up at each other in confusion. Edie. These are movie reviews. Correct. The term Jedi comes from the Star Wars movie franchise that began in 1977 CE and consisted of 4 films, largely being forgotten after the unpopularity of the last film. It described a nearly completely destroyed order of warriors that wielded telekinetic powers along with an energy sword known as a lightsaber. Shepard felt a headache coming on. So our alien somehow has a weapon exactly like something out of an old movie and thinks I'm a Jedi because I have biotics? How does an entirely new species even get a hold of a 200-year-old movie series? Unknown. I think we can consider the similarity a coincidence, Miranda commented. Until we can translate the language, we simply have no clue what that word means. Which meant waiting for their patient to wake up and learning their language enough to build a translation matrix. It was times like these that Shepard really missed Liara. She would have loved the chance to meet a new race and learn about their history. The ability for Asari to meld with and learn from other species would also have been a massive help. Okay, no use beating ourselves up over something we can't solve. Edie, let me know if our guest wakes up. The patient is awake, Commander. Oh, well, that was convenient. Great. Let's go introduce ourselves, Miranda. The patient has escaped and taken Dr. Chakra's hostage. Edie cut in. Shepard froze on her way to the door. What? Should I sound an alarm? Shepard quickly pushed down her raging emotions. One of her 2 only friends on this ship might be in danger right now, but rushing in and getting her killed wouldn't help anyone. Is she hurt? No, Commander. The patient is trying to establish communication. Dr. Chakras has not been harmed. Shepard could work with that. And as long as it stayed that way, she wouldn't throw the elf out the airlock. She turned back to EXO and started giving orders. Miranda, get Jacob and a few weapons. Meet by the elevator. Don't bother suiting up, there's no time. Her EXO nodded and sprinted out of the room. Edie, keep watching the medbay. I want to know the second the situation changes. And get me Joker on the comms. Hey Commander, what's? Shut it, Joker, we have a situation. Our elf woke up and is holding Chakras hostage. Oh shit, usually we don't run into trouble until after you get off the ship. What do you need from me, Commander? I'm taking Jacob and Miranda to contain the situation. I want you ready to cut the gravity mass effect fields in the crew's quarters on my signal. Yeah, I can do that. Have fun with the space elf. Miranda and Jacob met her by the elevator in seconds. Miranda was still explaining the situation to him when the doors closed and he handed her a factory-fresh M23 katana. Shepard scowled at the new gun, feeling there hadn't been enough time to start modifying a replacement for the one destroyed on Lorik. Hopefully she wouldn't need it. Stack up, Edie, open the doors on my mark. I don't want us shooting first, but we aren't going to bend over either. Copy? Copy, Commander. 3, 2, 1, mark. The doors opened, the 3 of them stormed in. Freeze, elf. Let her go. Shepard barked in what many of her squad liked to call her commander voice. Of course, she also mentally kicked herself when she saw the elf slip behind Chakras with her hands still around her throat. Demands like that only worked if the person you were ordering actually knew your language. All right, you incredible pain in my ass, we're all friends here. Shepard said soothingly. The words didn't count as much as the tone, right? Step away from the doctor and I will only punch you once for the trouble you keep causing. That's a pretty nice offer, the elf said in perfect English, shocking Shepard and the 2 Cerberus officers, but I'll have to decline. You speak English now? I do. Okay, great, that's better than I was hoping for. Shepard was expecting to have to use charades to get her point across. The Systems Alliance had to do it enough with ex-slaves that she was familiar with how to express herself, but talking would prevent mistakes. Let's start with introductions. I have nothing to say to you, Jedi. I'm sick of dealing with your kind. Oh great, Jedi is actually a title in her language. Shepard really was hoping it wasn't the same thing as the movies. Trying to convince her that Jedi only existed in an old entertainment film weren't real didn't sound like a conversation to have during a hostage situation. Can I at least get your name? I don't want to keep calling you Space Elf, and by the way, I'm not a Jedi. The elf looked searchingly at Shepard, like she didn't believe what she was saying. Do you not know who I am? She sounded skeptical. Shepard rolled her eyes. She wouldn't be asking for a name if she knew who she was. Your ship crashed in one of the more lawless zones of the galaxy. We have no record of anyone meeting your species before. The only close matches are fantasy books and movies. And Jedi aren't a real thing, just so you know. Whatever video you watched was a fiction film made by humans a few hundred years ago. The elf was looking at Shepard like she was crazy. What are you talking about? The Jedi have been a prominent figure in the galaxy for thousands of years. Shepard's headache increased. It seems like today was determined to be one of those days. Oh. It took a few more minutes, but eventually Shepard convinced their guest to release Dr. Chakwas and follow her to the conference room after promising she would get to see a galaxy map as soon as possible and extracting another that the elf would not try to escape, attack the crew, or damage the Normandy. Shepard made it clear if the elf broke her word she wouldn't hesitate to shoot her. To her frustration, the elf seemed more annoyed at the thought she was untrustworthy rather than worried about 3 armed humans surrounding her. Although when the elf immediately asked if the map in the CIC was real and started looking at completely empty sections like she expected something to be there, Shepard felt a tinge of worry. Unless their guest was trolling them for some unknown reasons, the slight concern on her face when she pulled up blank after blank had unsettling implications. Now that that's out of the way, Shepard started when all of them had taken a seat. Really uncomfortable seats actually. It was hardly a surprise she would rather stand usually. Miranda and the elf seemed unaffected, but Jacob decided to stand near the door under the pretext of guarding rather than subject himself to a chair. Why don't we try introductions again? I'm Commander Jane Shepard, Systems Alliance. Council Spectre, and currently investigating the disappearance of several human colonies in the Terminus system. The elf huffed. Might as well. I have several titles, most I won't bore you with. I've been known as Supreme Commander of the Revanchist, Slayer of Mandalore the Ultimate, and Darth Revan, Dark Lady of the Sith. At the human's nonplussed stares, she shrugged. See, I can list off a bunch of things that have no context too. Shepard fought down the urge to punch the annoyance. Fair enough. How about I call you Darth and you can call me Jane, or Shepard? I guess everyone else does. Ah, Darth is actually another title. I don't actually have a family name. The elf corrected. You can call me Revan. Shepard nodded. Thank you, Revan. Now then, for the biggest questions on our minds, how did you end up in Lorik? Where did you come from? None of the tech we inspected had any similarities with any race we know about, and we found no traces of Ezo anywhere. I guess I could answer some questions. Provided you do the same first. I'm not entirely sure how much to trust you with. Revan proposed, to which Shepard agreed as long as it wasn't about classified information. So Miranda and Shepard took turns answering Revan's questions and explaining the broad strokes of the galactic community. They glossed over things like the Citadel, the Council, the Protheans, and most of the other races since there was far too much to go over in any detail, and stuck to events over the past couple years and how humanity had participated in those events. Shepard tried to ensure that everything was presented fairly and none of Cerberus's human supremacy bullshit muddied the facts. That's a lot to take in. Revan said a couple hours later. I'll have someone get you a datapad with access to more historical files and cultural briefs. You can look into it more if you want. Shepard offered. Thank you, I'd like that. Now I suppose it's my turn? If you wouldn't mind. Miranda sniped from across the table. Very well, what should I answer first? You are from another galaxy, aren't you? Shepard asked before Miranda could say anything, stunning everyone in the room. I were? Shepard, that's just not possible. I feel like I'm missing something. Shepard smiled at the expression Revan was making. Miranda seemed skeptical and poor Jacob was completely lost. It was always fun when she managed to wrong-foot someone who had such control over their expressions. And how did you come to that conclusion, Commander? Revan asked slowly. It was pretty easy actually. Shepard gloated. You kept looking for systems on the galaxy map and looking confused when there was nothing there. Once or twice might have made sense if you were looking in one sector trying to obscure what you were looking for, but you looked all over the galaxy and there is no way we wouldn't know about your people if they had explored that far. We could have just kept to ourselves. Revan objected. From what you told me of the collectors, they do something similar. But we at least have heard of them and they use mass relays. You didn't know the term until we told you. Revan stared at Shepard for a bit as if trying to decide what to say. Shepard wondered if the elven humanoid would try to lie her way out of this. It's not like she had any hard evidence. And I know better than anyone, sometimes even then no one cares about the truth. She thought bitterly. After all, the Council still refused to believe in the Reaper threat after having one killed on their doorstep. It seems you're smarter than I gave you credit for, Jane Shepard. Revan said eventually as a backhanded compliment. I'm still not entirely sure what happened, but I made a blind hyperspace jump using an experimental drive engine, and unless you are pulling the most convincing con in history, I am a very long way from home. You used unproven technology with no destination? Miranda asked. I was desperate. Revan admitted. I had just been ambushed and thought a fleet was coming to destroy the station I was on. When it turned out it was a trick, my astromech had already started the jump. What's an astromech? A mechanical droid used to assist on spaceships. Revan explained. I had mine plot an emergency course so I could focus on other things. Speaking of, I don't suppose you searched the wreck for him, did you? Sorry, we looked through everything we could but we didn't find anything like that. It probably ended up wherever the engines vanished to. Jacob said. Revan nodded in acceptance. What will you do now? Shepard asked when it became clear Revan was simply waiting on them. We are going to be landing on Omega soon, so you will be stuck with us for a while, but after that we might be able to drop you off at a nearby colony or even have the Alliance pick you up. And if I preferred to leave on Omega? Revan asked, eyebrow raised but with an even tone. Wouldn't recommend it. Jacob commented. Omega is a den of criminals and slavers. You would be in the thick of it without a whole lot of credits. Besides, I wouldn't want you to worry about all the stuff we retrieved from your ship getting stolen. I'd feel bad if we spent all that time getting it for you just to have you lose it to the first pirates you came across. Shepard added, ignoring the glare from Miranda. She no doubtedly wanted to keep the salvage for Cerberus, but Shepard wasn't about to steal from a refugee from another galaxy. Revan immediately perked up. Wait, what stuff? That ship was fresh from the assembly line, nothing should have been on it. Oh, well, I have no clue why it's there, but from what we can tell there are a lot of mechanical parts and data tablets. All of it's in the starboard cargo bay for now. You can check it out later. Thank you, Commander. So any idea what you want to do? Shepard prodded. She didn't want to force a decision now, but if Revan was new to the galaxy she would definitely need a plan, or else she would get swallowed up by some mercenary gang somewhere. I think I'm going to look for a way back to my own galaxy. Revan said determinedly. There's a race of creatures called the Vong looking to invade my galaxy and kill everyone in it. I need to find my way back before that happens. Oh good, it's not just us dealing with omnicidal invaders. Shepard muttered sarcastically. Guess some things never change even in other galaxies. Wait, what? Shepard sighed heavily. Okay, let me tell you about the Reapers. Revan idly browsed through one of the datapads the Normandy crew had provided with information about the new galaxy she found herself in. Speaking with Shepard had been concerning to say the least. Revan had been preparing for a galaxy-wide invasion for years now. Waking up in another galaxy and finding out a similar invasion was expected to happen put her in a weird position. Revan had no attachments to this new galaxy. There was no one she cared about living here. She hadn't spent years traveling it and learning the different cultures and practices of different planets, immersing herself in the knowledge and traditions of a dozen different worlds even when it caused friction between the Jedi Council and herself. She would be perfectly able to just leave the Reapers and their pawns to the locals, even if they seemed similarly unwilling to prepare for invasion as her own home had, and try and find her way back. Of course, she also had no resources, no friends or allies, and no reputation here, all of which would be needed to secure even the most rudimentary workshop to manufacture a working hyperdrive. And she would have to make her own. A quick search on extra-galaxy travel had the first attempt of the locals estimated at a 600-year journey to another galaxy. Needless to say, Revan did not have 600 years to spare, and there was no guarantee that her own galaxy wasn't even further away. Should she simply stay with Commander Shepard then? There was obviously a decently powerful organization behind the woman. And if Revan could assist with her current mission, she might be willing to assist getting her home. Of course, there had been an odd mistrust between the commander and the two officers she had with her. It was as if the commander was constantly watching the two of them and checking over what they were saying. Without more time to gather more information, Revan wasn't confident making any long-term plans. She would be forced to stay on the Normandy for a little while longer at the very least. She had looked up Omega as well, trying to verify how truthful the dark-skinned human was being during their meeting. Unfortunately, he had not been exaggerating the amount of criminals on the station. Revan would be doing nothing but cutting her way through thieves after her salvaged equipment for months if she was seen being dropped off with no protection in place. The door to the cargo bay opened, and after a polite knock on the frame, Commander Shepard walked in. Revan wasn't unaware that her actions in the medbay had lowered the commander's opinion of her a good bit. That Revan had just woken up from an orbital crash, an attack by Batarian Slavers, and hadn't done any permanent damage to Dr. Chakwas were likely the only reasons she wasn't spending her time in the brig. That and Shepard seemed to be a bit of a bleeding heart if the public records could be trusted. Revan, Shepard greeted. Getting caught up on the galaxy? The basics at least. It's easier since your galaxy has fewer spacefaring species in it, Revan said. Did you need something? Shepard filed away that information for later. We're about to dock at Omega. I'm dropping by to let you know you are coming with us when we head off to recruit our specialists. Revan raised an eyebrow. You trust me enough to follow you into what your own crew described as a nest of pirates and slavers? Of course not, Shepard waved flippantly. But I'd rather have you running around where I can see you rather than doing who knows what on my ship. A little unfair, Revan thought, but it would be enough to start gaining some goodwill from the commander. Violet eyes stared challengingly into bright green. I suppose this means you will be returning my armor and my lightsabers? Shepard nodded. Jacob has them in the armory. We're getting them wired with temporary comms and an omnitool. We don't have time to get you fitted for a hardsuit, and I'm not going to risk friendly fire because I forced you to use a gun you don't know the first thing about. Revan's eyes hardened at the thought of some random person going over her armor. She wasn't as touchy about it as most Mandalorians she had come across, but she had fought them and with them long enough that some of the culture regarding how they treated arms and armor to wear off on her. Maintenance was to be done by the owner or a trusted individual alone. Revan would have made exceptions in emergency situations, but she didn't think this one counted. She took in a hissing breath. I would appreciate it if your men left my armor alone in the future, she said. At least as long as it isn't urgent. Shepard looked a bit surprised at the anger. If you're worried about him breaking something, he is only adding in the hardware with a bit of adhesive. No breaking it apart for secrets or anything like that. Revan shook her head. It's more of a cultural thing, I admit. I'm not a proper Mandoa or Mandalorian, but there are expectations about personal armaments. Mandalorian, you mentioned something like that earlier. Something about killing Mandalore the Ultimate. Are those related somehow? Shepard asked. They are, Revan confirmed. The Mandalorians are a culture of warriors, not really restricted to a single race. A few years ago their empire declared war on the galaxy. I fought their leader over Malaka V and killed him in single combat. It had been one of the hardest fights of her life. And the one that started her on her path to where she was today. So their leader is called a Mandalore? They are. Mandalore, or more properly Mandala, roughly translates to Soul Ruler. Basically they are supposed to be the best the Mandalorians can offer. And you killed him. Shepard seemed to be analyzing Revan's explanation. She had no way of knowing exactly how impressive a fighter Mandalorians tended to be, but she was smart enough to hear that a group of warriors had declared war on a galactic scale and were presumably confident in coming out ahead. Then Revan had managed to kill one of the best of them in single combat. And I killed him. Revan agreed. Well, hopefully you won't need to do much of that on Omega. If all goes well, we simply get in, grab our specialists, and get out. Revan snorted. And you really believe that? Well aware that things rarely were straightforward when dealing with criminal dens. Shepard sighed and hung her head slightly. Not for an instant, but a girl can dream, right? Oh. Revan found Jacob standing at a workbench when she made her way to the armory. The Cerberus agent was hard at work cleaning one of the several rifles the Normandy kept on hand. She took the opportunity to look around the armory without distraction. Unfortunately, it seemed that most of the weaponry was just the same mass-produced models she had seen earlier. Revan wasn't sure how this group stacked up against the rest of the galaxy, but if this was standard, it seemed she would be dealing with physical projectiles most of the time. That would take some adjusting. She picked up one of the pistols on a bench and turned it over in her hand. It was a decent design, Revan thought. It fit well in her hand and it seemed simple enough to operate. Not that she would likely ask for one. She was only an okay shot, and that was with a blaster. Best she stick to her lightsabers and maybe see about building a blaster and a few energy cells if she could figure out how to erase any data on them. The armory had what seemed like a few small fabricators that she could make use of, but she didn't want to just hand over any tech. Sell it perhaps, but hand it over for free? Not a chance. The pistol was returned to the bench when Revan saw Jacob finishing up his task. The man secured the rifle and stowed it with quick, efficient movements. Sorry about that, wasn't expecting you up here so fast. I don't think we've been introduced. Jacob said. Jacob Taylor. I hear you're coming with us to Omega. He held out a hand and Revan accepted it with a raised eyebrow. You can call me Revan. And yes, your commander decided she wanted me off your ship while you went looking for your recruits. Jacob chuckled. I wouldn't take it personally. The commander takes care of her people. She's pissed you went after Chakwas, even if she understands why you freaked out when you woke up on a strange ship. Thinking you were captured by the same people that tried to kill you would make anyone try and escape. Give her some time and she'll mellow out. He misunderstood why Revan acted the way she did, but she felt no need to correct him. Instead she simply nodded and looked around the room. Shepard mentioned you had my equipment up here. I'd like to make a quick diagnostic check before we head out to the station. I doubt you have the time for more than the basics. Jacob hedged as he walked over to a locker Revan hadn't noticed. Shepard won't want to wait too long. But I patched the hole on the leg with some omnigel and reinforced some of the damage on the chest. Patch jobs, but it keeps everything sealed. I saw some damage to the underlayer, but I don't know the first thing about your stuff, so I left it alone. Revan pushed down the slight resentment of another person fixing her armor. It wasn't the time and it wasn't Jacob's fault, he didn't know it would bother her. And my lightsabers? They really called that? They're in here too. Jacob handed her a heavy sack containing all the components to her armor and a small box containing her lightsabers from the locker. That should be everything. When you get everything on drop by again, and I'll run you through the basics of the Omnitool. Oh. Are you sure it's a good idea to bring Revan along? Miranda asked. We don't really know anything about her. Shepard glared half-heartedly at her XO, and her staying behind would be any better? You saw what she did on Talk. 15 Batarians killed and she almost took us out with them. And that was after a crash and with nearly crippling injuries to her leg and second-degree burns on her chest and shoulder. She huffed a bit. I'm not saying we need to never let her out of our sight, but I want to get to know her a bit before I offer her to join the mission. You want to recruit her? Miranda's eyes went wide. Of course I do. Shepard replied. She's skilled, probably one of the best close-quarters combatants ever I've seen, and she doesn't have any ties to anyone else at the moment. She's also apparently been through a war before. Who knows if she knows something that would tip the odds in our favor? We know next to nothing about her. I know next to nothing about you and the rest of Cerberus. Shepard pointed out, making Miranda grimace. Or even any of these specialists we're here to recruit. Besides, I don't see anything wrong with recruiting the person who is basically staying on the ship anyway. Shepard might not really care for Revan, the situation with Chakwas still bugged her, but she recognized Revan had valuable things to contribute. And who knows, maybe Revan would slip up and wind up at the mercy of Chakwas after a mission? Shepard pushed that thought away. It was petty. And not just a little cruel. She had been forced to work with several people she had significantly more reason to dislike than Revan, and she'd never wished they got shot. It was something she never would have considered before. Cold surrounding her, flailing uselessly in the void, hissing air, can't breathe, can't breathy, can't breathe. Before. Just another reminder about how she wasn't quite the same. We spent a great deal of time investigating everyone on those dossiers. Miranda protested, fairly weakly though. She understood Shepard wasn't about to change her mind at the moment. The final decision wouldn't be made until she had seen Revan in action anyway. It doesn't matter for now anyway. Let's focus on our first 2 recruits before we start looking at another. Shepard suggested. They're here anyway. True to her word, both Revan and Jacob walked up to join them at the airlock. Jacob was in his usual black Cerberus jumpsuit, Revan in her red and grey armor, though she was carrying her helmet for now. Once again she had a black robe concealing most of her armored form. You two ready? We have a basic idea where to look for our Solarian doctor, but we might need to dig around for Archangel. Shepard said. Ready whenever you are, Commander. Jacob affirmed. Revan nodded and began to walk out the airlock onto the station. Shepard snagged her arm and pulled her to a stop. Revan, I know I ordered you to come along and you aren't actually required to go along with what I say. But if a firefight breaks out, I need to know you will follow my lead. I can't waste my time worrying about a loose cannon. Revan looked at her inscrutably. I'll follow your lead. For now, she said eventually. But don't expect me to start jumping to follow commands, Shepard. That works. Shepard agreed. That wasn't an issue. She would just need to treat Revan like she did Rex. An ally to be guided rather than a subordinate to be ordered. She released her hand and the both of them walked off the Normandy onto the station. Oh. Well, this certainly got more interesting than picking up a scientist. Revan commented as the 4 of them walked away from Afterlife, a nightclub run by Asari pirate queen and de facto ruler of Omega Aria Cloak. Her voice slightly distorted by her helmet. Shepard resisted the urge to sigh. More interesting than expected summed up a good amount of her missions. This might be a problem. Miranda points out. We don't have another candidate on Mordin's level picked out. We might have issues with those Seeker swarms the Quarian told us about on Freedom's Progress. Seeker swarms? Revan asked. Collector tech. Some kind of insect drone that injects a paralytic. Jacob explained. It's how they've been abducting colonies without them fighting back. Well, that sounds lovely. It also presents an issue since without a skilled scientist we have no way of getting close to the collectors if they use those against us. Miranda ranted. Unless our guest has some hidden skill to assist us. Sorry, more of a mechanical engineer than a bio one. Shepard stopped and turned to face Revan. You're an engineer? Well, yes. Revan shifted on her feet. And you didn't mention this earlier? Was there a point? I'm not familiar with your tech base at all. I'll work on that simply because I refuse to get stranded in space if something breaks, but that is weeks away for even the basics. I guess not. Still, it was another thing Shepard would keep in mind about Revan. They continued to casually talk all the way to the quarantine sector. Miranda kept poking at Revan, trying to learn more about what she was capable of. Jacob seemed content to ask for more details occasionally when Revan tried to blow off Miranda with an unimportant story regarding whatever interesting gadget Revan mentioned. Shepard found the whole trip weirdly relaxing. For once she wasn't the center of attention. It wasn't something that used to bother her. Shyness was not something her N7 instructors encouraged, but ever since she woke up, she felt like eyes were always on her. On her scars, on her behavior, whatever she did was always under scrutiny. For just a little bit she was free to not need to project that she was unshaken from her death to a bunch of terrorists that seemed to be her only hope to stopping the colony attacks. It was nice. Then they reached the quarantine zone and she needed to put her commander mask back on. Oh. Revan was decidedly uncomfortable. Something was odd about the force here. It was still present, nothing wrong there. It was just still. Tiny ripples instead of the steady waves she was used to. When she had heard about the Reapers, Revan had half expected the galaxy to be tinted with various shades of the dark side. Instead it didn't seem to be tinted at all. Even in Omega, a place full of suffering and hatred, Revan could only feel the slightest presence in the Force. She might have taken the time to investigate further if she was alone. But with Shepard clearly wanting to get out of Omega as quickly as possible, she doubted she had the time. Besides, it was somewhat fun verbally sparring with Miranda. The Ravenette didn't hide her interest in whatever technology Revan could offer, and Revan was determined to get the best deal for any tidbits she handed out. Naturally, both Jacob and Miranda were interested in the thermal detonator. Miranda because the component technologies for creating a small thermonuclear fusion reaction would lead to breakthroughs in several fields, and Jacob because it was an incredibly powerful explosive. No matter the galaxy, it seemed soldiers liked things that went boom. Things took a bit of a darker turn after they passed the guards' area set up. Bodies were being stacked and burned just feet away from the guard post. 2 mercenaries in blue armor, the Blue Suns according to one of the guards, had spotted them and opened fire. Too bad they were not dealing with unarmed civilians but 4 very unamused combatants. The mercenaries barely had time to realize they messed up before they were shredded by a combination of bullets and Shepard's weird imitation force technique. Guess they just left the dead in the streets, Jacob said with disgust after making sure no other mercenaries were around. He had his eyes on the piles of bodies near the fires. Each one riddled with bullet holes. Burning corpses, Miranda said a little more analytically. Must be trying to keep the plague from spreading. Shepard said nothing but noticed there was someone still alive nearby. Wait here for a second, I'm going to see if they are okay. Revan and the others nodded and returned to watching for any additional Blue Suns members. A bioweapon targeting anything non-human? How despicable. Shepard commented after she had finished with the plague victim. Revan tended to agree. She was also incredibly thankful that she had filters on her helmet. We should find Mordin quickly. From the sound of it, the Blue Suns and the Vulture are going to turn this quarter into a war zone soon. There was little discussion as everyone moved ahead. The plague seemed to be much worse than the humans anticipated. So much so that they were distracted enough to nearly walk headfirst into a Blue Suns guard post. Revan quickly placed a hand on Shepard's shoulder to hold her back. Revan? What are you doing? Stopping you from getting shot apparently. Revan chided. She pointed down the hallway to a metal barricade with a few figures in blue and white visible. Unless you were planning on walking right up to them with your head in the clouds? Shepard cursed under her breath at the loss of focus. No, you're right, I lost focus. She shook her head. All right, what are the chances they will let us through? Not high. Miranda commented. If they are scared enough to start shooting civilians, I doubt they would let armed unknowns through without a reason. Especially not if they are getting pushed out by the Vulture. Revan reached out to the Force, trying to get an idea about what was ahead. There was danger ahead, but nothing that felt like it was more than she could handle. Fantastic. And we're a mostly mid to short-ranged group going against a hardpoint. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Shepard started before noticing Revan beginning to walk off. Revan? What do you think you're doing? She hissed. Revan ignored her and walked confidently up to the Blue Suns, drawing their attention pretty quickly. Well, this is new, usually the humans run when they see us. A Batarian Revan assumed was the leader called out. Looking to apologize for the shit you did to us? Well, if you don't move, we promise not to piss on your corpse before we toss it in a fire. Revan ignored the Batarian. Instead, she raised her left hand and pointed it at the merc. Her right hand held an unignited lightsaber. Counter offer. Revan called darkly. Let me and my companions pass and I will let you live. She heard Shepard curse at Revan, giving away there were more of them nearby. Screw you, human. Shoot the idiot. There was a snap hiss of a lightsaber activating, the sound of gunshots, and then a sizzle as a trio of bullets vaporized on the red energy blade. I gave you a chance. Lightning arced from her hand, frying the three on top of the barrier and causing the Blue Suns troopers behind it to curse and run out, rifles blazing. Two of them were yanked off their feet and sent flying into a wall as Revan charged, another two coming out of another doorway. She sidestepped as the two opened fire, reaching out to the Force and nudging the farthest one's aim so he was shooting into his companion's back. Unfortunately, the shots were blocked by a flaring blue shield and the trooper stopped shooting before the shield failed. Not that it mattered, since a second later Revan was close enough to lash out with her lightsaber. The first trooper was nearly bisected as his shields and armor did little to protect him from the ruby blade. The second was dispatched with a clean stab through the middle of the chest, severing his spine. Revan pulled her lightsaber free and turned to face the two she had thrown earlier. They were just getting back to their feet when there was a bark of a shotgun and one of their chests exploded in gore. Another burst of machine gun and rifle fire cut down the last trooper a second later. What the hell was that? Revan turned to see a furious Commander Shepard stalking towards her. Did you mean something specific? There was a hint of a smile in Revan's voice. Shepard grabbed Revan's robe and pulled the slightly taller woman so they were face to visor. Don't give me that shit. She snarled. You want to paint a giant target on your fucking chest and dance around in front of the enemy? Fine, great even. Since you can apparently throw lightning around and we established you aren't under my command. But you decide to drag my team in with you? After saying you'll follow my lead? A finger was thrust just underneath Revan's visor. That shit doesn't fly. Revan was silent for a moment before she pulled herself back out of Shepard's grip. You are right. I forget that you don't actually know what I'm capable of. I won't announce your presence like that if I move independently again in the future. Good. Shepard nodded decisively, evidently mollified by Revan's not quite an apology. Make sure it doesn't. Now let's go find our doctor before someone else shows up.